What just happened between the United States and Canada could have consequences far beyond what most people realize. At first glance, it looks like another political disagreement, another trade dispute, another moment of diplomatic tension between two neighboring countries. But once you start looking at the deeper economic connections between these two nations, the story becomes much bigger. Because the United States and Canada are not just allies. They are two of the most deeply integrated economies on Earth. Every single day, billions of dollars in goods cross the border between them. Energy flows south. Manufacturing parts move both directions. Airlines cross shared airspace. Supply chains depend on materials that travel back and forth across that border hundreds of times before becoming finished products. So when tensions start rising between Washington and Ottawa, it is never just about politics. It is about the systems that keep the entire North American economy running. And if those systems start to strain, the consequences can spread quickly. So what exactly happened? And why are economists, business leaders, and political analysts suddenly paying close attention to a dispute that most headlines are barely explaining? To understand that, you need to understand how leverage actually works in modern trade. What just happened in recent days, political tension between the United States and Canada has started to rise again over trade policy, economic pressure, and competing national interests. The disagreement itself is not entirely new. For years, Washington and Ottawa have occasionally clashed over issues like agricultural protections, digital taxes, energy policy, and trade regulations. These disagreements are usually handled through negotiations, trade panels, or quiet diplomacy behind closed doors. Most of the time, they never become major public conflicts. But sometimes political pressure changes the tone of the conversation. And when that happens, leaders on both sides can begin framing routine economic disputes as national issues. That is when tensions begin to escalate, because once trade disagreements start getting framed as tests of political strength, backing down becomes much harder. And that is exactly where situations like this become dangerous. Not because one policy decision suddenly changes everything overnight, but because once the rhetoric starts escalating, each move can trigger reactions that ripple through markets, industries, and alliances. And in a relationship as interconnected as the one between the United States and Canada, even small disputes can expose much bigger vulnerabilities. Understanding the system to understand why this relationship matters so much, you have to step back and look at how deeply connected the two economies really are. The United States and Canada share the longest undefended border in the world. But more importantly, they share something else: a massive web of economic interdependence. Every day, thousands of trucks cross the border carrying parts, materials, food, energy, and manufactured goods. Many of those products are not finished when they cross the border. Instead, they move back and forth multiple times as different factories add different components. A car built in North America might contain steel from Canada, electronics assembled in the United States, and parts that traveled across the border several times before final assembly. That means the economies are not just trading with each other, they are partially built on top of each other, which creates enormous benefits during stable times. But it also means that when political tensions appear, the pressure can spread quickly across industries. And that brings us to the real question. In a dispute between two economies this deeply connected, who actually has the leverage? The hidden leverage at first glance, it might seem obvious. The United States has the larger economy. It has a bigger population, larger financial markets, and greater global influence. But leverage is not just about size. Leverage is about dependence. It comes from controlling resources or systems that the other side cannot easily replace. And this is where the relationship between the United States and Canada becomes far more complicated than it first appears. Because Canada supplies the United States with several resources that are extremely difficult to substitute quickly. Energy is one of the biggest examples. Canada has long been one of the largest energy suppliers to the United States, providing significant amounts of oil, natural gas, and electricity across the border. Those energy flows are supported by pipelines, transmission lines, and infrastructure that have taken decades to build. Replacing those systems overnight is simply not realistic. Then there are critical minerals. Canada produces several minerals that are essential for modern technology, manufacturing, and energy systems. These materials are used in everything from electronics and batteries to aerospace components and industrial equipment. If supply chains are disrupted, it can take years to develop alternative sources. And then there is geography. Many air routes between North America and other regions of the world pass through Canadian airspace. Shipping routes, rail networks, and transportation corridors between the two countries are tightly integrated. None of this means Canada has unlimited leverage. But it does mean the relationship is far more balanced than many people assume. And that balance becomes very important if political tensions ever start interfering with economic cooperation. Impact on ordinary people, because when trade disputes escalate between major economies, the consequences rarely stay inside government offices. Eventually, they reach ordinary people, and they often arrive faster than expected. If supply chains slow down, manufacturers can face delays. Factories that depend on imported materials may have to reduce production. Construction projects can become more expensive if building materials suddenly cost more. Energy markets can react quickly to uncertainty. Even the possibility of disruptions can push prices higher as traders try to anticipate shortages. Transportation costs can increase if trade routes become less efficient. Airlines may need to adjust flight paths. Shipping companies may face longer delivery times, and logistics networks can become more complicated. For consumers, these changes usually appear as rising prices. Higher fuel costs, more expensive goods, longer waiting times for products. And businesses that rely heavily on cross-border trade often feel the pressure first. This is why economists pay so much attention when trade tensions start escalating between countries that are deeply connected. Because the damage rarely stays limited to the original dispute. It spreads outward through the entire economic system. Why escalation is hard to stop, one of the most dangerous dynamics in political conflicts, is something that economists and diplomats understand very well. Once tensions escalate publicly, backing down becomes difficult. Leaders do not just face international pressure, they face domestic political pressure. If a government appears weak, critics at home may accuse it of surrendering national interests. So each side starts taking actions designed to show strength. But those actions often trigger responses from the other side, and suddenly what began as a manageable disagreement turns into a cycle of escalation. History has shown this pattern many times. Trade disputes become tariff battles. Tariff battles become broader economic retaliation. Economic retaliation can spill into diplomatic tensions, and diplomatic tensions can begin affecting security cooperation and alliances. None of that is inevitable, but the risk grows every time rhetoric escalates faster than negotiations, and in relationships as important as the one between the United States and Canada. The stakes are unusually high, global consequences. The United States and Canada are not just neighbors. They are part of a much larger global economic system. Both countries are major exporters. Both are important players in international supply chains. Both participate in global alliances and economic agreements. That means the rest of the world watches closely whenever tensions appear between them. Investors pay attention because markets depend on stability. Allies pay attention because cooperation between the two countries is important for international partnerships. Businesses pay attention because global supply chains often depend on North American resources and manufacturing. If uncertainty spreads, companies begin looking for alternatives. Countries start diversifying trade relationships, and supply chains slowly begin shifting toward regions perceived as more stable. This does not happen overnight. But history shows that repeated political conflicts can gradually reshape global economic patterns. So this story is not just about one political dispute. It is about something much larger. It is about how modern economies depend on cooperation between nations that share resources, supply chains, and geographic advantages. The United States and Canada have spent decades building one of the closest economic partnerships in the world. That partnership has supported millions of jobs, trillions of dollars in trade, and a level of stability that most regions rarely experience. But relationships like that require constant management. They depend on diplomacy, negotiation, and a willingness on both sides to avoid turning routine disagreements into major confrontations. Because once tensions begin to escalate, the consequences rarely stay contained. Markets react, supply chains adjust, businesses look for alternatives, and trust between partners becomes harder to rebuild. So the real question now is not just about who wins a particular political argument. The real question is whether leaders on both sides recognize how much they actually have to lose. Because when two of the world's most connected economies start pushing against each other, the shockwaves rarely stop at the border. And the decisions made in moments like this can shape relationships for years to come. The only question left is this: will cooler heads step in before tensions escalate further? Or are we about to see a dispute that grows much bigger than anyone originally expected? Who has the real leverage here, the United States or Canada?